Hello and welcome to West Virginia Author. I'm your host, Lynn Squires. Our guest today is Connie Kinsey. Connie is a former military brat who has put down deep roots in a converted barn on a dirt road at the top of a hill in Unum, West Virginia. Her award-winning writing has been published online and in print. She is also a spoken word artist and the current writer-in-residence at the Museum of the American Military Family. She lives with 2 dogs and a cat and is pursuing happiness 1 cup of coffee at a time.
This is true.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're welcome. As writer-in-residence, you were recently published as one of the main contributors to the anthology E Pluribus Unum, Grace Under Pressure.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and what GRACE stands for?
It was an exciting project. GRACE is an acronym that stands for gender, religion, race, identity, culture, and ethnicity. And what we did was we sent out a survey to retired military, active military, their dependents, their spouses, anybody that had anything to do with the military. And we asked them a series of questions about their experience of those things while serving in the Marine Corps, or serving in the military. My dad was a Marine. And we got lots of surveys back. We actually had an anthropological analysis of them done to analyze the statistics. And they determined that the military is very diverse. But we also solicited essays from some of the respondents. And our youngest person was 9, and the oldest one was 92.
Wow.
So it's an interesting book. It's serious, but it is in turn heartwarming and funny and thought-provoking, and some parts will make you angry. I mean, it's much like the military itself. I'm very proud to have been a part of it.
Well, I see you brought a copy with you.
Yes, I did.
It's huge.
It's huge. Yes,
I was expecting a smaller volume.
Something like 297 pages.
Yeah,
yes.
Pretty big. So you're the writer-in-residence for this group.
I'm one of 2 writers-in-residence.
How did that come about, and what do you do as that person?
Well, I am a very proud military brat, and on Facebook, which is my whole life, I hang out in military brat groups, and we reminisce about what it was like, and we span from World War II era brats to Afghanistan brats. The museum director put a call out in one of these groups that she was looking for a writer-in-residence to work on this project. And she was intentionally vague about the project. I just found this out. But she solicited people who might be interested in doing an essay a month for a year on topics to be assigned. And up went my hand. I mean, I feel like I have prepared my whole life for this opportunity, and we didn't know anything about what it was about. And she got 2 of us that were qualified to do this, and she couldn't decide. We were both good, so that's why there are 2 of us. But we were given 1-word prompts to write about, and we wrote in a vacuum. We did not know what the other one was writing. And Circe gave us very little direction on what she wanted. What she wanted was our take on these things. And so it was complete freedom to write my thoughts in a way that I had never thought to do before. And my first essay is on identity. And I had not particularly thought about that carefully. But I have always, in my bio, described myself as a former military brat. It's just, those first 14 years of my life affected and shaped me profoundly, and I had not realized how much until I sat and thought about it.
Well, I'm sure not being a military brat, we have diverse backgrounds totally. So that's interesting. I'm sure that'll be a great read and be very successful for the museum. You've also been involved as a presenter 3 different years for the Women of Appalachia Project. How did that come about, and what is the Women of Appalachia Project?
Well, not as a presenter. I was
Included in their presentations.
right. I was a spoken word artist. The first one, I had written a piece on my own one night at home. I was living without air conditioning. It was dreadfully hot, and I was feeling very dramatic. And I wrote a piece that was very short, and I really liked it. It was one of those things that it came whole cloth. It was like a gift from the writing goddess. And it needed very little cleanup, and I just liked it. But there wasn't really anything to do with it. And so I got an email from one of the mailing lists that I'm on about the Women of Appalachia Project was soliciting entries for their Women Speak anthology. And so in a fit of daring do, I typed up my little application and sent this thing off, and actually kind of forgot about it. And then I got an email that I had been accepted. And what I hadn't understood was that it was spoken word. And I had never done spoken word before. So my first reading, I showed up, and I was like I was lined up to be midway through the program. And everybody else was performing. They had memorized their stuff. They were acting it out. They were singing parts of it. And then there I was with my little paper. And it was like, oh my Lord, this is a disaster. And I got through it, and I immediately went home and called my friend, who is a speech communication specialist. And she came over and coached me for 5 hours one night on how to read this piece. And over the years, I've gradually gotten a little bit better.
So do you memorize now, or?
No, I am too old to memorize.
I just can't do that either.
No, I
I'm
can't
with you
do
there.
it. I print things out in 18-point type when I read it.
There you go. So you brought an excerpt with you to read?
I did.
In 18-point font?
An 18-point font, I did. This was from my second time with the Women of Appalachia Project, and this is actually a piece of fiction, and it too came whole cloth. It just came out of nowhere. But it was a writing prompt in response to Rhiannon Giddens' song, Moonshiner's Daughter. And this was my take on her song. We call it the plum. It's the prettiest moonshine we make. The shine is made from my papa's recipe in a copper still just like it was 100 years ago. In each jar we put 13 sweet plums from the trees my great aunt planted after the 37 flood. 13 because that's the number of the disciples plus Jesus, the number of full moons in a year, and the number of children Papa's grandmother birthed, not counting the ones she buried before the rest of them buried her. The river-soaked land fed those trees well, and the plums we harvest are the best you've ever had. They're a beautiful dark ruby color, and as they soak in the shine, they release their juice and turn the shine a color that reminds me of a summer sunset when you just know it's going to storm in a few hours. The sky all dramatic with bright color and swirling clouds. I love twirling the mason jars in my hands so as not to get those plums moving round and round. The shine gets prettier and prettier as the movement releases even more color from the plums. Yes, I'm a moonshiner's daughter, and even though I wasn't the longed-for son, Daddy taught me the art. He passed a few years ago, so now it's just Mama and me making the plum. Folks come from miles around to buy it. One fella bought 40 cases of it, 6 jars to a case. I asked him what he was going to do with that much shine. He said, why, drink it, of course. Me and my friends just love this stuff. He asked me why Mama and me weren't more afraid being on our own and selling shine. What he meant was being without a man to protect us. I told him that I'm meaner than a wildcat. My daddy taught me to shoot just as good as he taught me to shine. He laughed, but I wasn't making a joke.
Very good. And appropriate for this area.
Yeah.
How is spoken word writing different than an essay that's to be read instead?
In my case, there's not a lot of difference. I am not a visual writer. I am very auditory. And when I write, I hear it in my head. And there needs to be a rhythm, and there needs to be spacing, and there needs to be pauses. I use a lot of ellipses and em dashes when I write. But for most writers, there is a distinct difference if they're going to speak it as in opposed to something that you would read. And I'm trying to learn the difference between those two. And I'm trying to be more visual with my writing because I forget that 70% of the population is visual when only 30% of us are auditory.
I've read a good bit of your work over the years, and I can tell things that you are maybe planning to read because there's sentence fragments and things that strictly as a written piece you'd be going, but I can hear you reading it. It's like appropriate for the written word to be read. You have published a digital essay, which was kind of a new concept to me when that happened. So tell me about that process.
I took a class from, her name escapes me right now and I'm embarrassed about that. Out of the blue. She's in the Boston area and she is the daughter of a good friend. And Kathy, her name is Kathy Bisbee. And she is probably one of the world experts on digital storytelling, which is a new genre, I guess you would call it. And so I took this class just because I didn't know anything about digital storytelling. Well, it just rocked my world. And the one that I have posted was my first one. It was the class project. Oh, and it needs all kinds of work now. I mean, I know that. But it was an incredible amount of work, but it was also so much fun. And you can do so much more in that medium than you can with just words on a page.
I've seen it, and it's really magnificent. I thought, I mean, your words are always good, but to see pictures that go with it at the same time, I really, really enjoyed that. You don't see a whole lot of it now, though, or at least
it's
places
getting
I
to
look.
be something.
Well, it's fascinating, I have to say that. It's kind of like spoken word plus
Right.
on steroids kind
Right.
of thing. To change lanes a little bit, you're a pretty big advocate of literary citizenship. So
Yes, I am.
what is that exactly?
It's a term that I encountered for the first time this past February, and it's actually been around for a while, but it's gaining some traction again. Literary citizenship is the concept that as an artist, as a writer, you have obligations to the community to be a good citizen. And that would mean supporting other writers, going to their readings, buying their books, or at least reading their books and recommending them, making sure they're in the library, interviewing them on your blogs, anything you can do to help promote and support other writers.
Okay.
And I really took that to heart. I believe writing is a gift and that we have an obligation to share it and that everyone should be nurtured.
Well, it's an interesting concept, and I don't think I'd really heard or read about it until you mentioned it a little while back. I think that's a battle for a lot of writers to involve other people in their process. And I mean, you almost see people on social media begging for reviews for their work or whatever. I've tried to do a lot better at that and actually post reviews for things as I read them. But it's one of those things, it's like you have to make a distinct effort to do that.
Yes.
It's not.
It's a lonely occupation. And so having a cheerleader or somebody that will give you honest feedback is just absolutely valuable.
I know every now and then I'll get an email from somebody that reads my magazine column, and it's just like, oh, like
Right,
the angels
exactly.
are singing or something. So what are you currently working on?
I am working on two things right now. I am working on a memoir about being a military brat during the Vietnam era, which is a hybrid memoir. I refer to it as a collage. It's a little bit of everything. I'm incorporating my dad's memoir, his journals, his letters home, my memoir, some autofiction that I've written, and I even have one poem in there right now that's not very good. We'll see if that stays in there or not. I have that out for feedback right now on how to improve it. And I'm also working on a dark comedy. Writing the memoir is emotionally exhausting, and sometimes I just need a break from it. So I'm writing the comedy, and I tell you, it's the hardest thing I've ever written. Comedy is hard. You know, being intentionally funny takes a lot of skill, and I'm learning that very much the hard way.
I know a lot of my writing, people comment that they were amused by this or that, and it's almost like it has to come. You can't plan it a whole lot because it's either funny or not funny, and I don't know, I think the writing gods like give it to you.
Yes.
And throw it in
There
there.
is some truth to that.
What does a perfect writing day for Connie look like?
A perfect writing day? I had one the other day. It's when you wake up and you have a to-do list a mile long, and you completely ignore it. You make a pot of coffee and you sit at the computer and you just write. I wrote everything. I did blog posts, I worked on the memoir, I worked on the comedy, I did some critiques, I emailed some other writers, I worked on writing prompts for a writing group that I facilitate in the morning, and it was perfect. I did it from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed. And I never have time to indulge that way. So it was lovely.
So on a normal day, you might get a slice of what that looks like?
On a normal day, I try to write at least an hour every morning. And I prefer 2. 2 hours a day is about all I can contribute to it, the way my life is right now.
I know you and I both have been involved at different times in a writing circle facilitated by a woman in, I think, Virginia. But the gift, aside from writing every morning for an hour and a half, is the community.
The community
is come about. And talk a little bit about that and what that means to you as a writer.
Well, I'm very much an introvert, but writing in community rocks me in a way that surprises me. I discovered with spoken word that I like having an audience and I like getting feedback. And it's nice to work on a writing prompt, and then when we're done, some of us will share what we've written. And you can tell by if people laugh at the right parts, if they sigh, if you get applause, that sort of thing. If the writing is doing what you wanted it to do. And it's very valuable feedback. But I love writing in community.
That kind of surprised me as well, how much I really enjoyed that. And I didn't expect this when I went into it, but on Zoom, the chat box over on the side, people will type like little phrases that you've read that struck them, and it always surprises me what they
grab
pick out.
onto. Yes,
it's been a very interesting thing. So you're doing that yourself at way too early for me in the
Yes.
mornings.
The woman who offered the class is a woman named Diane Zinna, and she is absolutely dynamic and fabulous. And people that were in the class were from literally all over the world. And to accommodate the most people, she changed the time of when she offers it. She offers it once per quarter. And the time she changed it to was just absolutely out of the question for me. And it broke my heart because writing in community just meant the world to me. And I found a couple people who also couldn't do it for one reason or another. And we meet much earlier, and we have copied the format, but we grab our prompts from online somewhere, and nobody leads the group. We're just a group that gets together every morning, and there's no craft teaching. We just write in community, and we're having a ball.
So if somebody's interested in writing at the crack of dawn with you, I think your contact information is going to be on the screen so they could get a hold of you.
But it's from 7 to 8. It's not exactly the crack of dawn.
Well, when you're retired, it's the crack of dawn. If you were going to talk to young writers, or either young people or just new writers starting out, what kind of advice would you give to them?
Okay, I'm going to tell a story.
Okay.
When I was 8, and I don't remember this, when I was 8, I wrote Beverly Cleary a letter after I read Ramona the Pest. And apparently I told her it was the best book I had ever read in my whole life, and that when I grew up I wanted to be a writer. And I have no memory of this. And she wrote back, which I also have no memory of, and I don't have the letter, but my mom tells the story. And she wrote back and she said, "Great. What you will need to do besides write a lot is that you will need to read a lot." And I loved hearing that because I was an insatiable reader. And I read absolutely everything I could get my hands on, but I wrote very little. I thought as a child that it would be something that I would know how to do when I got older. And so I didn't really write too much as a child. And then I got a little bit older and I started being pushed in different directions. And I sort of abandoned the I want to be a writer when I grow up thing. I ended up pre-med in college and spectacularly dropped out. And the only class I had enjoyed were my literature classes. I needed to be a writer, and I let myself get deterred. And you don't need to wait until you grow up. You need to start writing now, and you need to read everything you can get your hands on.
I too wanted to be a writer when I was younger, but I didn't write a whole lot in my younger years except like high school and junior high angst over unrequited love and that sort of thing. So I get that. It's, Nancy Drew was my person, and Trixie Belden back in the day. What about writing conferences? What's important about that, if they are to you?
Back to the introvert thing, I had never been interested in writing conferences in the least. And it sounded like, it just sounded unpleasant. I was going to be with a big crowd of people and somebody was going to yammer at me for hours on end, and we were going to eat bad food. But I was persuaded to go to the West Virginia Writers Conference 4 years ago, as a matter of fact. And it was an epiphany. I learned more in 3 days than I had. I eventually went back to college, but I learned more in those 3 days than I had learned in 3 creative writing classes at Marshall. And I had excellent instructors at Marshall. I'm not putting Marshall down by any means, but the conference is just intense and packed with information. And I've been every year that they've had one since.
And this year you taught, I think, some
yes,
classes?
This year I taught 3 workshops. Taught is perhaps a strong word. I prefer the word facilitate. I talked about writing prompts, which I have a deep and abiding love for, I always have. And I talked about literary citizenship and feats of daring do, which are when you make your way into an opportunity that you're not necessarily qualified for or feel like you're not qualified for. And then the third workshop was on spoken word and open mics. And I talked about Teresa helping coach me through the process, and I basically passed on her tips.
The spoken word thing, how do you go about teaching somebody else how to do that? I mean, do they read for you and you get a sense of their areas of deficit, or how does that work?
What I did in the workshop was I had people write to a prompt that they knew that they were going to read aloud. And so they wrote as if they were going to read aloud. And I gave them some tips about, read it like you're telling the story to a child. Make eye contact. Look at your audience. Put some life into it. And that when you read these things aloud, the value in spoken word and in open mics is that you get immediate feedback as to whether it's effective. Did it do what you wanted it to do? And I think of open mics particularly as a form of editing, knowing where you need to make changes.
Good point. We just have a couple of minutes left, so I have to ask you my question that I ask everybody.
Okay.
If you were stranded on a deserted island and it could only take 2 books with you, what would you take and why?
I would take Tom Robbins' Skinny Legs and All. And I would take, the second book would be Harriet the Spy.
That's the second time in 2 days I've heard that book. Why would you pick those two, especially Harriet?
Harriet the Spy spoke to my soul when I was 10 years old. She was perhaps, more so than Ramona the Pest, Harriet was the first character that really came alive for me. I could see her being a real person. And she made me laugh and she made me cry, and I hurt for her. Skinny Legs and All by Tom Robbins is indescribable, and I just would encourage you to look it up. But I used that book, it was an epiphany in my life when I was introduced to it. It was my first Tom Robbins book. And I treated the book as a book of daily, what's that word?
Affirmations?
Yes, daily affirmations. I would just open a page and read a sentence or two. And every page there's a gem. He's a light-hearted Vonnegut is what he is.
Well, we've run out of time.
Okay.
I wish we could have some more. I want to thank you a whole lot for being with us today. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
You're welcome.